So I'd like to talk a little bit today about the prop firm industry and the situation that we have at the moment. Prop firms, for those of you that are not familiar, are really, I guess, most beginning traders' answer to how do I acquire enough money so that if I'm making, say, 1 or 2% a month, that it can be a meaningful profit figure. Well, the simple answer to that question is prop firms. Now, prop firms are not a new concept. They have existed actually for well over 100 years. But fast forward to now 2024, and it feels like we have literally hundreds of them. And the fundamental difference with these firms and how they existed before is that a lot of these now are not bricks and mortar. They are virtual. You can find them anywhere. Just do a Google search. Now, why am I talking about this topic? Well, as I mentioned, prop firms are usually quite fundamental for a lot of traders to get enough money to trade with. However, there has been a significant change over the last 4 years. And by that, I mean about 4 or 5 years ago, there were just a handful of these companies that were internet only. And in the time since then, particularly about 3 years ago, there was almost an explosion in that world. And those companies have now really sort of taken over in terms of the concept of what does it mean to be a beginning trader. How am I going to make money out of this business? The problem is that, as with most industries that expand very fast, usually there is a crunch. Usually there isn't enough participants, in this case, people buying prop firm challenges. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But one thing which has really kind of soured the landscape is about a year ago now, there was a operation conducted by US and Canadian regulators against what was then the biggest prop firm market, which was MyForex funds. I personally had about $350,000 with them in terms of active accounts. I was making a nice little sum every month from trading those. And almost from day to night, one day in August last year, the entire firm was essentially shut down. In fact, we're still waiting to hear the outcome of that. But why do I mention it? Well, it comes down to a very simple point, which is that the US authorities do not allow US citizens to trade CFDs. CFDs are contracts for difference. Not really important that you understand the fine detail, but suffice it to say that there was a belief that a lot of these prop firms were essentially offering something very much akin to CFDs. They had tried to go after particular prop firms in their jurisdiction, but they were clearly going after a whale, which in this case was MyForex funds. Now, MyForex funds was actually based in Canada, but the US and Canadian authorities did a joint attempt to shut them down, and they were successful. Now, that put some waves in the market for prop firms. And let's just talk about what happens when you buy one of these, what we call challenges. Well, the most basic model for a prop firm is that you pay, say, $500 US for a $100,000 account. And with that $100,000 account, you need to generate a certain percentage of profits. It used to be the case that you had a time limit to do it. Now you don't. So a typical figure will be between 8 and 10%. And there is often a second phase, which will usually be 5 to 6%. Once you have passed both of those stages, you then have access to not strictly a live account, unfortunately, but a funded account, probably, is the best way to describe it. And with that funded account, you can now start making profits. If you've made 2% on a $100,000 account, in other words, you've made $2,000, you will probably keep about 80% of that and upwards. So $1,600. Now, that whole operation costs you $500. And you might be thinking, well, it's not that much, $1,600. I'm based in the US or somewhere in Europe, and, my costs are through the roof. Well, it's then possible to scale up. There are often cases where you can either buy a new challenge, or you can show, again, profits over a certain threshold, and they will provide you with an increased account. There's no reason, however, why you need to do any more work or spend any more time. So, if I just take that simple example, 2%, $100,000 account, keeping 80% of the profits, I'm keeping $1,600 on a $100,000 account. If I go up to a $200,000 account, I'm now on $3,200, and so on. You get the picture. A lot of these firms were allowing between $400,000 and $600,000 of capital or simulated capital that you could trade. So you can do the maths, right? Think about the number of these firms that existed. So there were a lot of people making very good money from this. The regulators in the US then realized that their options for going after firms based in the US were probably quite limited to much smaller prop firms. And then they moved into the second phase of their operation in this industry. That second phase involved them going after a company called MetaQuotes. Why is that important? Well, MetaQuotes is a US company that has a particular platform which has been used for going on 20 years. There are a couple of iterations, newer versions, but the original one goes back almost 20 years, and it's called MetaTrader. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of these prop firms were using MetaTrader as their platform in order to allow people to try to pass these challenges. Again, remember, they're supposed to be going after US citizens who shouldn't be trading in CFDs. So they went after MetaQuotes, and as a consequence of this, what has now happened is that a lot of prop firms that probably do wish they had more US clients, who may not even have any, are now getting their licenses to use MetaQuotes, MetaTrader, revoked. That puts them in a difficult spot, because for most of them, their main source of income, to be very frank, is failing traders. Traders who start a challenge, fail the challenge probably because they're gambling, and they've lost that, say, $500. That is the lifeblood for a lot of these prop firms. And for about 2 months, February and March in particular, this year, 2024, they were in full throttle mode against these companies. So a number of them just simply pretty much vanished overnight. So you can imagine the situation was similar to mine with my Forex funds. One day you're trading fine, the next day you have no more simulated capital to access. Some companies have, I think, tried to do the right thing. They've tried to be transparent with their customers, to tell them that they're in a bit of a difficult situation. They've had to pause operations. Take that as you will. Maybe it means it's an indefinite pause. But essentially, they've tried to be a little bit more transparent, and in some cases, they've actually refunded money, because the actual business itself is still profitable. What's really caused the issues have been the US regulators. So, fast forward today, and the million-dollar question is, people asking me is, what prop firm should I use? Well, first of all, I don't have any affiliation with any prop firm, so let me just put that out there, that whatever I say, you can be assured I'm not getting any kind of compensation for it. The first point I would say is that there are two basic types of prop firm. There are many versions, but two basic types. The first one is the one I described earlier, a traditional challenge-based prop firm where you need to meet usually two criteria, 10% and or 5 or 6%. And once you pass those criteria, you get access to those funds. The second version is something which appeals perhaps more to traders who struggle to do that, but want to have access to the capital. It costs roughly double, but they're what you might call instant accounts. So I might pay, say, $1,000 and get a $100,000 account, and I can keep a certain percentage. And that percentage may vary. At the maximum, it will probably be, again, about 80%, but it could be lower. So those are the two types of firms. Now, something I spend probably too much time, but enough time looking at the moment, is I look at the Discord channels for a lot of these prop firms. And I'm looking really almost from an auditor perspective as to what are the red flags. And the red flags, inevitably, are when you see people complaining that payouts are slow, non-existent. They're getting, the company is basically saying that they've broken some very soft rule and they've denied them a payout for whatever reason. That's indicative, in some cases, all things being equal, of a firm that may be going through financial pressure. Now, if I was to give any company names, remember, I'm not compensated by them, but if I was to give any company names, I would therefore look at the companies that have the best longevity. All things are relative. When I say longevity, I'm usually talking about a company that goes back to, say, 2014, 2016. 2016 is the typical one. And there are two obvious front runners. They are FTMO, which is based in the Czech Republic, and the Fibers, 5 as in the number, numeric, ERS. And those two companies have been around since 2016. They have made a name for themselves in the business as being solid. Now, there is absolutely nothing guaranteed in this world. But if I was to say, put a gun to my head, which of the two firms that I would choose, at this moment, I would only really go with them. Thank you.